Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on migrating complex Lotus Notes applications. Today's webinar should run approximately 1 hour. We will take questions at the end and encourage you to put your hand up, ask as many questions as you'd like, and at the end of this presentation, we'll make sure that it's available to all that have attended, and hopefully we'll get a chance to speak at some point after this presentation to talk about your pending migration. So just to get started, a little bit about Rivet Technology Partners. We were formerly an organization called Metalogic Consulting. We've been in the Lotus Notes world for the better part of 18 to 20 years. And the bulk of the work that we did as Metalogic Consulting was all around Lotus Notes development. We had a fairly large practice here in the Toronto area, and we supported organizations and their applications as far away as Japan. Back about 4 years ago, we rebranded as Rivet Technology Partners, and really that was a decision made fundamentally to help support the organizations that we were working with in their migrations. And our focus turned at that point from supporting Lotus Notes and Lotus Notes applications to migrating Lotus Notes and Lotus Notes applications. We've got a full experienced migration team, and we focus on everything from the beginning stages of the project and strategy and platform decisions right through to the execution of the program, including migrating mail users to both Exchange and Office 365. But predominantly the work we do is still on the application side and migrating those applications. We are currently partners with both Microsoft and IBM. On the migration utility side, we're partners with both Quest and Binary Tree, as well as Casal and Dagis. And we do have our own proprietary products, and we did when we were Metalogic, we had a suite of email management products, and our current products have expanded to include our DCOM solution for archiving application databases, Lotus Notes application databases, and doing it as part of a migration instead of migrating all of your applications. There's an opportunity to cut costs on that migration by archiving them instead. So we'll speak to that a little bit later in the migration or in our presentation. So migration lessons learned. Obviously, we've had a fair amount of opportunities to work with a lot of our larger clients in the early stages of the migration, going back several years. One of the very first things we learned was that most organizations start with the decision to migrate and really don't have a clear understanding of the scope of applications or the extent of the applications within their environment. In which point, it's not uncommon for most of these migrations to start with a significant understatement of the size of the project. We also know that a lot of the organizations we work with, that Lotus Notes had become the backbone of their organization. They have applications that reach into every single business unit that they have. Another item that we also learned very quickly is that users during migration don't really want to part with any of their data. One of the reasons that we developed our archiving solution. Another key item that we learned, which is really important to this discussion that we're going to have today, is maintaining focus. It's about focusing on the migration as it is and really trying to eliminate redevelopment from the project scope. And really the purpose is to try and get through this migration as quickly and efficiently as possible. When an organization gets caught up in redeveloping applications over migrating applications, you typically get into a long delay. Pieces of these projects take significantly longer than expected. Quite often, there's a ramp up of resources and understanding of the future platform, and that can all take its toll when you're looking to complete a migration. And the third item that we've learned is resourcing. Migration is going to have a significant impact to your organization, especially to your ID group and to your application development group or your application support group. Your organization is going to continue to require the same type of service and resources it's always had. If you divert your internal resources to a migration, it's going to impact your business unit's ability to expand and be more productive with new applications or better applications. So we think it's important that that role is still fulfilled by an organization, and anywhere that a migration can be automated and can leverage external resources that understand, of course, the migration process and don't necessarily understand your business units and your business requirements, they're in a better position to focus on the migration, while your internal resources are in a better position to continue to focus on developing and supporting your business units. So when we start most migrations, if not every single migration, we really want to get a handle as to what does the application environment look like. And only with a real complete view of all of the applications within your environment can you really begin to understand the task at hand. And furthermore, be in a position to start identifying what those potential platforms for these applications might be. When we start this process, we're really looking to understand three main attributes per application. One, of course, is use. How important is this database to your organization? Who owns it? Who does it serve? Another, of course, is complexity. Is this a simple and straightforward database with little to no logic? Is it going to export well or migrate well to a future platform? Or is there a significant amount of code behind the scenes? Is there a significant amount of workflow? Is there complexity to the application? And of course, that's important in identifying where this application could potentially land in terms of platform. And of course, another attribute always worth considering is the size of the database. Is it going to have an impact on the environment that we're moving it to? Is there a better way to address some of this historical data and move it off to potentially another format, and start almost in a fresh form with this new application, especially if it's going to expand quite quickly and demand a significant amount or a future significant amount of the environment in terms of storage. And then at this point, I think to really understand this and do this properly, you really need to have the full support of your business units, because a lot of this knowledge on what the application does and its value to the organization is going to come from those business units. But what we end up with looking at the application matrix, we're usually, or most organizations are usually looking to drop these applications into three targets. One, of course, is elimination. Which applications provide absolutely no value to this organization or to your organization going forward? And we see this in every environment that we've been in. It could be, a cookbook or an application or a database full of recipes or best cakes. And we've seen these. And of course, they're great. They're not necessarily productive to your organization, but they're actually great at team building and providing a great work atmosphere. But moving these to a new environment doesn't necessarily make sense, of course, unless it's a great cake. The second is archiving. What data do we need to keep around long term, and what is the best format for that data? And of course, the third is migration. And most organizations typically pick a platform and say, this is where we're going to migrate all of our applications. So let's look at the target platforms for a minute. We have experience essentially with these four platforms, and most of the organizations we talk to have at one point or another considered one of these four. Let's start with Salesforce, or Force.com as a development platform for a moment. The difficulty we've seen in Salesforce, and we would still continue to be proponents of the platform from a development perspective, but there is a significant cost of entry. Depending on the nature of your organization, really has a lot to do with how many licenses you may have acquired, or how many licenses it makes an investment sense to acquire. If your organization, of course, is focused on sales and marketing, you'll probably have a higher percentage of people with those types of licenses if, of course, you're leveraging that platform. If not, you're going to need to acquire licenses for almost all the users that are going to require applications or require access to applications within the Force platform. And that, to date, has been the biggest issue that we've seen. And we've talked to a lot of organizations that had hoped to move their applications to Force.com, but the consideration of current costs and what the potential future costs of that platform might be, it's been a difficult decision to make. Google applications, or Google Apps, of course, has been around for some time, and only now are we starting to see organizations looking to Google Apps as a potential target for the Lotus Notes applications. The issue that most organizations have in making the decision to move all their applications to Google Apps is that it is cloud only. And a lot of organizations, of course, are still looking to house this information and hold these applications within house. We also know that Google Apps isn't that well suited to complex workflows at this point. And for these reasons, it's had a fairly poor adoption record to date for Lotus Notes applications. PHP, on the other hand, is well suited to complex applications. Most Lotus Notes applications can be recreated in PHP. One of the difficulties that we have is that there is no migration utility. And if you have any sizable number of databases that you want to move over to a new platform, having a migration utility, a good, strong migration utility that does what it's supposed to do, is paramount to a successful migration. And finally, SharePoint is where we see most of the organizations we're talking to trying to land in terms of their Lotus Notes applications. And of course, it is a very good platform for collaboration and for document management. Your template-based applications, such as team rooms, migrate very well to SharePoint. It's great for simple forms or data capture forms. But what we found is that only simple Lotus Notes applications convert well, and trying to migrate your complex applications is going to pose some significant challenges that we'll touch on shortly. One of the other issues that we have noticed in SharePoint is that it does come with resource challenges. Obviously, it's had a tremendous adoption rate, across the industry, both in organizations looking to migrate from Lotus, as well as organizations that have been historically within a Microsoft framework or Microsoft stack. That has resulted in the inability to acquire and hold on to strong development skills, resources that have a tremendous amount of experience within SharePoint, and they do come at a high cost. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, the main issue we have with SharePoint is that it's not as a robust platform as Lotus Notes. If you're going to move complex applications or complex Lotus Notes applications into SharePoint, it's going to require a significant amount of workaround. And it's going to require more effort at the end of the day than an application originally did in Lotus Notes. Advanced workflow is inadequate out of the box. It does require third-party extensions in SharePoint. Its SharePoint applications are going to require Visual Studio. And anytime you're doing redevelopment, you're likely going to cause major interface changes to what the original application looked like. And that, at the end of the day, is going to result in increased adoption and support cost, in that the end users are essentially going to have to relearn what these applications do and how best to achieve the means and the results within the application that they originally did in Lotus Notes. So let's talk briefly about SharePoint and the limitations of trying to move our complex Lotus Notes applications to the environment. When we started with looking back, comparing SharePoint to Lotus Notes or to Domino, Domino provided an open slate when building applications. Coding can be done in Formula, can be done in Lotus script, Java, JavaScript, and from using these various pieces, you could build very complex applications, and you could build them from scratch. And when we're looking at developing in Domino, 90% of the things that we were doing in Domino, that a good Domino developer, was completely customized. Workflow did not require a workflow engine. Developers could create a process for setting the state of a document and then routing it along to the next individual. And Domino was very no SQL, so it allowed the programs to create fields and data items in the back end. And most of these things, we just can't migrate to SharePoint. With SharePoint, however, we're provided with a very strong framework, and when used within its framework, it's an excellent platform. But when we try to recreate complex applications within this framework, we almost need to break the framework in order to do this effectively. And when doing it, it's going to require a number of third-party add-ons to meet the objective of some of these complex applications. And in the end, what you're left with is an extremely difficult and cumbersome process to recreate these applications in SharePoint. Another item worth considering when we're looking at migrating or developing complex applications with SharePoint is its scalability. In Lotus Notes or in Domino, we could create a very large application on a single server, and that wouldn't have any impact on any of the other applications that are running within that server. In SharePoint, it's a different scenario. SharePoint is a throttle environment, and when we deploy a large database or large applications within SharePoint, there is an effect on the neighboring applications. So those are things that you need to take into consideration when you're architecting your environment, when you're building complex applications or large applications within SharePoint. And then, of course, at the end of that is also if there are design scenarios or considerations that are fairly complex, that in itself poses a challenge when we're trying to migrate existing Lotus Notes data to those applications, and of course need to be considered during the entire architecture phase as well as the entire build phase of some of these applications. Another, or at least some additional items worth considering when migrating to SharePoint is cascading fields, of course, multi-level view categories, frame sets and navigators, hide when functionality, and forms that contain action bar items other than straight save and close, and global keywords and lists. And if your existing application is leveraging any of these items, you're going to have extreme difficulty moving them into SharePoint. And on a final note, and absolutely worth considering here is security. Security, from our perspective, isn't as robust in SharePoint as it is in Notes. In Notes, we can do security at various levels within the application. We can look at individual documents in Notes and provide restrictions for reading, editing, and authoring purposes, all things that we can't do within SharePoint. In Notes, we can provide specific roles to individuals and groups within the application. In SharePoint, it needs to be done by person. So we may have a list of thousands and thousands of people, each with their own access rights, as opposed to doing it by and security and access rights, as opposed to doing it by group. So you may end up having to re-architect your solution completely differently than you had originally in Domino. And you may need to, in fact, we've seen this pattern before, split an application into two. In order to provide specific functionality to different departments or even at an organizational level. So when we follow this course of action and try to implement some of these security rules within SharePoint, obviously it's significantly complicated. It takes tremendously more effort and time to do this and to do it well, and can potentially introduce other issues as you go, which could require additional amount of rework. So when we're looking at our original matrix of applications, we really need to look at the complex applications differently. So coming back to this, the applications that don't have a tremendous amount of complexity can be moved to SharePoint fairly quickly and fairly efficiently. It's the complex applications, of course, that are really the biggest issue for a migration or for any migration, this upper quadrant. And this is typically where most migrations start to fall or falter and stall. What we've seen historically in your organization might be in the same scenario. Is that typically at this point, project goals, are cut back, because the costs have been so high in trying to move some of these complex applications to SharePoint. In some organizations, we know that they put, the freeze on the entire migration until they can, conduct or forensically what has happened to date, why the costs have been significantly higher, and what, of course, they can do differently moving forward. And let's talk about that. What we see as the best landing point for our complex applications is .NET. And for a number of reasons. One is, .NET has been a standard application platform for many, many years. There's lots of great resources on it. And furthermore, and probably more importantly, is that it is similar to the SharePoint stack. Both .NET and SharePoint leverage IIS, MS SQL, Visual Studio. And we can even go as far as hosting .NET applications within a SharePoint environment. So not only can we migrate business critical applications to .NET, but we can still do it within the Microsoft stack and still do it with SharePoint as the intranet or portal or collaborative environment for an organization. What we've also noticed is that there tends to be better .NET developers in the marketplace than there are SharePoint resources, and that's absolutely critical to making sure your migration is successful, especially when considering if you've got these complex databases or complex applications and how many you might have. And one of the, coming back to a point I'd made earlier, one of the key considerations for .NET for us was making sure that there was a great utility available in the marketplace that allowed us to do as much automation during this migration process as possible. And we've been able to do that with Dagis and with their Composer technology solution. And the Composer technology solution converts the Lotus Notes applications to .NET. It converts the UI, the business logic, the Notes database, the document data, and the ACL security as well. Not only is it fast, but more critical in our opinion is that it's a fairly smooth transition, not only for your developers but also for your users. The learning curve for a Lotus Notes developer to .NET is fairly quick and fairly efficient, especially when compared to SharePoint. We've seen a lot of Lotus Notes developers get extremely frustrated when they try to work within the structure of a SharePoint environment. When we're looking at migrating Lotus Notes applications to .NET using this Composer solution, we have the advantage that it maintains the look and feel and the navigation of the original database. What does that mean? Well, ultimately, at the end of the day, that's going to be improved rollout and delivery to your organization, because they're not going to be required to go through training on all the new databases and applications that you're converting. And furthermore, from a test perspective, given that the applications are fairly similar and navigate very similarly, it's a lot easier to test this application from both a development perspective and, of course, from a user acceptance testing perspective as well. I think what we'd like to do at this point, we're going to hand this over to Brian Halstead of Composer Technologies. He's going to do a quick walkthrough on how this solution works and why, of course, we can use this efficiently to migrate our applications to .NET. Brian?
All right, thank you, David. So, as David indicated, my name is Brian Halstead. I'm a senior software engineer with Composer Technologies. And the demonstration I'm about to do is of a sample database that we use for a training program that we do here at Composer. And this just kind of represents your average looking Notes database, where typically you'll see this kind of design layout in Notes, where you'd have an outline on the left that allows you to select multiple views, and as far as the resorting of the data from the document data within those views, as well as just some various different types of views, including ones that have categories, that have totals columns, different various formatting for the actual within the view columns that you have. If I open up one of these documents, the main form documents within the application contains some various design layouts that are common in Notes and that are seen kind of across the board, including tab tables. This one also contains a nested tab table, as well as a section control, various text fields, drop-down lists, radio buttons, and a rich text field. As well as some action bars, an action bar that's shown at the top that contains various programmable buttons. and actual button control within the form design. So that just kind of covers the basics of this particular notes application. But now I'm going to go ahead and convert it. So the first step I need to do is from SQL Server, I'm going to go ahead and create a new database. And I'm just going to use the default options from SQL Server as far as security is concerned from a SQL Server standpoint. Obviously, this can be configured accordingly within the specific environment so that security is configured properly for the backend database. I'm just going to say OK, and then our database has been created. Now, once the Composer solution is installed, it is installed as a Visual Studio template as far as a website template project. So to begin the conversion process from within Visual Studio, I would go ahead and select New Website. Once you come up to the New Website dialog from Visual Studio and that Composer has been installed, you will see Composer Website as an option within the installed templates. So here in the new project dialog, New Website, I'm just going to go ahead and call this project demo and click OK. The next thing that comes up is our kind of our conversion import wizard that has just a couple pages of information that can be selected and modified in order to specify, what is going to be converted, and also during the conversion process how that application gets converted and the various kind of look and feel or layout or the structure, I should say, of the website in Visual Studio and the Solution Explorer. So here's that training database. I already have it selected here within the database selection box. I could also browse for any other NSF or NTF files here as well. Just to kind of touch on a couple of the possible, some of the different options that you're allowed during the conversion process. First and foremost, you do have the option to import data at the end of the conversion process, and this will import all of the document data into the configured SQL Server database. You may not want to do that during a conversion if the NSF that's being converted is considerably large and contains hundreds of thousands of documents and may have like a very, very large file size, because this could cause just the end of the conversion process to take hours to import all that data. Another important one, because in Notes you can add field items to document records in a sense via code, either through formula language or Lotus script, and those fields may not exist as part of an actual form design. If there is data available within the NSF, then this option will actually scan all of that document data to locate any of these dynamically added fields that get added through code. As well as here are some other options and just how data is treated during the import process and also scanned as far as from a design point of view for the resulting application. So I'm just going to keep these default options selected here and then go ahead and hit next. So here is where you just have to have the database connection information specified. And this is actually currently set to that demo database I just created on my local SQL Server. And then there's also some other options here that are specific to just SQL Server. We also do support Oracle, but for Oracle we currently don't support full text indexing or the indexing of attachments. But for SQL Server we do. And this just makes use of SQL Server's built-in full-text indexing of indexable data that exists within the form tables. And then within the actual application, and it's provided as part of the runtime that, the whole application, kind of the runtime framework that the applications run within. From the views, there's a full-text search bar that then can be used similar to how the full-text search bar was used within Notes. Where it locates document records from the view based off of not just the data that's displayed within the view, but also any searchable text within the actual records that exist in the database, including attachments that are supported by SQL Server, which could be Word files, Excel, PDFs, just plain text. And so it'll actually search into those attachment records that exist within the database structure to locate documents that have attachments that match whatever the search or the query is being put against that database. So I'm going to go ahead and hit test here, and my connection's good, and then I'm going to hit finish. Now the conversion process is going to run pretty fast. However, the status or the current process that Visual Studio is working on during the whole entire conversion, it will be indicated here in the lower left in the Visual Studio status bar. So I'll just try to hit on the main points that occur during the conversion process. As I said, it's going to run pretty fast. So I'm going to go ahead and hit finish now. So the first step is the actual project template's created, and then it starts analyzing the data or design information from the NSF. During that process, it starts generating C# classes within the Solution Explorer after it has done that process of scanning the actual document data. And then from that point, it goes through and creates all the necessary tables within the configured database, and then actually starts importing the document data. The last part that will occur is it'll actually generate the web pages that will be the UI for the associated forms and views and subforms, and then that's it. This message here is just indicating that the certain Lotus constructs, for example, from either formula language or Lotus script, cannot be directly translated, or there may be issues during the translation and conversion to C#. One example of that would be the on-air resume next statement that exists within Lotus script. There is no direct translation to C#, and there's no construct within C# that can do a resume next like you can in Lotus script. So in those cases where some of these things occur, or that the converter just kind of wants to draw the developer's attention to within the converted application, the converter will actually insert to-do comments within the generated code. Those comments are usually, across the board, just in reference to certain functions or methods that are called, or as I said, unsupported translations from Lotus script directly to C#. So I'm just going to say OK to that. And all of those to-dos are also displayed within Visual Studio in the task list. So if I open up the task list here and select comments, you'll see all of those to-do comments listed throughout the various code files that make up this application. So I'm going to just go ahead right now and build this. Well, let's see. The general structure for the application within Visual Studio Solution Explorer follows the layout similar to how they were divided up, or the design elements were organized within the original NSF. So for example, here under the app code folder, we have folders which represent shared actions, agents, forms, libraries, or script libraries, subforms, and views. These kind of back-end C# classes represent the actual objects that the Composer runtime will work with when it's dealing with documents within views, or actually displaying view pages or form pages, subforms, view grids, etc. Within these classes, you will always have two main classes. One represents the actual document object that the current manager class will work with, and then there will be a manager class as well. Within the manager class, for each type of element, including views, forms, subforms, this is where you'll have either computed columns or computed fields, any hide when logic, action button logic, any just standard buttons like within a form design, inclusion of subform classes, as well as pretty much any of the events that occur for the specific design element. For example, for a form, you could possibly have a post open or query mode change, and any of those types of events are also handled there as well. So now, unlike Notes, Notes was kind of, especially Domino Designer, is kind of a WYSIWYG editor, where everything was kind of contained in one spot, where you had all your different little code components that existed within a visible form design, which could be edited similar to like a word processor. Here, things are kind of split up now between a UI portion, which is an ASPX page or ASPX user control, and the backend portion, which handles all of the business logic that existed within Formula Language and Lotus Script. So this does follow the general design aspects of an ASP.NET application. So for example, this is the main form for that application that was converted, and this has now become an ASPX page with various controls that are defined here either by .NET as ASP controls, or we have some of our own custom controls that we've designed that are included as part of the main runtime assembly. And this is just pretty much standard ASP markup in HTML here. So you can actually view things accordingly within Visual Studio based off of that markup that's being specified. So I'm going to go ahead and build this application now, and there's going to be one compilation issue that is there by design. We've actually we've kind of engineered this compilation issue on purpose just so that there would be a compilation issue. Typically, with a really complex application, you're going to see a lot of compilation issues. So this doesn't necessarily represent all of the more highly complex applications. This application kind of falls into the intermediate zone as far as complexity goes. So now that that compilation issue is fixed, I'm going to go ahead and start up the application. And also here, this is just starting it up locally within Visual Studio. Eventually, after you work through all your to-dos and compilation issues and testing the functionality of the applications, you would publish this off to an IIS server, and that's where it would be running from. So here, here's the converted application. So again, on the left-hand side, we have our outline that has various links to various view pages. If I click on these links, the actual data comes up that was imported into the configured SQL Server database. And the formatting that existed previously for these particular views and the data that they're showing within the view columns for the document data are formatted similar here based on the various settings that were read from the design information from the NSF. Obviously, some UI things may need to be cleaned up after conversion, but it's usually just a factor of adjusting widths, heights of things, possibly including just some image references for icons that were originally shown, just to get that application kind of tightened up to look like it originally did in Notes. So if I go to this main view here and open up the first document, this again is showing the converted main form design that came from the NSF. And within that, we have all the various controls that came over. Again, we have a tab set control here that also contains a nested tab set. We have a section control here, the various text fields, drop-down lists, radio buttons, as well as the rich text field here that includes an actual rich text attachment, including buttons and just various UI layouts as far as tables and colors and fonts and what have you. We do support the whole transition of the mode of the form, so we do support the read mode to edit mode. So if I double click on this form, just like similarly in Notes, the form enters into edit mode. Again, there may be some height adjustments that are required to just clean things up and make them look better. We also support AJAX postbacks for pretty much all the processing, minus when you actually navigate from page to page or when you're transitioning form modes. Otherwise, all code postbacks occur via AJAX, and for in this case here, I'm adjusting this radio button, and you can see that it's actually affecting hide when. That was part of the original logic that came from the original form. So we can look at the same exact form from the Notes database and just kind of do a direct comparison here between the two. It's pretty close to the original one. If I pull this into edit mode, again we have our hides when, and with various options in this drop-down list control. from the converted application. Here's that same hides when, and all the various data that was available from that drop-down list control. From the Notes standpoint, when you're in the Notes client, you do have a lot more access to various specific options from menus that exist, within the client itself. So, for example, there are various agents that have been defined that exist under the Actions menu, as well as the actual form that you can access. You can compose from the Create menu. Since we can't add those directly into the menu bar for the browser, we have actually added those to a context menu that's accessible from the View and Form pages. So if I right-click here from the View, we have a Create menu, which again, this is that Notes journal entry that existed over here, and then the Actions for the agents that have been specified to show up within the Actions menu. There are also various other options that are available from this context menu that we've either added to help support more of the options that are available via the Notes client that wouldn't directly be available within a browser, including adding some, extra things that maybe aren't really provided as part of the Notes client, but we find that is referenced a lot across multiple applications and projects as we encounter more and more NSFs. So for example, here you can export any of the views data to a CSV file or to an Excel file, as well as being able to import data into the database using a CSV or Excel file. To take a look at the actual database structure, since Notes really is not normalized in any shape or form, and that the general document object is just kind of a generic container that can hold any number of information and any number of items, as I said, that can be added, on the fly programmatically. The way that we structure the actual database is each form that is referenced that actually has a design within the NSF will get an associated table generated for it. The table columns that exist within a form table are generated by the actual field items that were scanned in the document data or were actually defined as part of the form design. There are various other system tables that our Composer runtime needs access to just to help better track information, and there is some very slight normalization that does occur as far as, for example, attachments. They get offloaded to a separate attachments table and are relinked back to the actual form tables via the Notes document ID. If we take a look at some of the data that actually exists within this main form table for the application, we can see that a lot of the data that came over is just directly brought straight over to SQL Server as is when it was read from the actual Notes document. Like, for example, the Notes IDs, these are the actual real Notes IDs that existed inside the NSF, and they're not modified in any way. So you could technically refer to a specific document ID in the NSF and refer to the same document in SQL Server, and it's going to have the same ID. We do support those IDs going forward for newly generated document records, and it follows the same kind of format that existed within the Notes database. An example of just showing you what the attachments table looks like. Again, here's our unique ID that references this specific attachment record back to an original forms table, and then the field name that the attachment exists in, its type, the attachment name, and its binary or blob data. From this point, there's also, we have to take into consideration the security for the application. We do support all of the various security access levels and also any roles that come from the access control list. So for as far as access levels, for manager, designer, editor, author, reader, all of that stuff is supported. And it's mapped to the configured security provider. Via the runtime, we do support SQL Server and Active Directory, just out of the box once you have it set up and configured correctly. And that can be done just like with any other ASP.NET application via the web config and adjusting the role manager sections accordingly to get it configured and connected to a security provider. As far as the actual access control list itself, that gets applied to a file that's called the acl.xml. And the way this works is it's pretty much just a mapping file that connects a security provider, group memberships or names, usernames from the security provider into the actual access levels and application roles that exist within the converted application. So for example, if I was a member of the admins group within Active Directory and I had this configured to use Active Directory, then I would fall into the manager access level for the application, as well as falling into the app admin application role. And that way, as far as any of the calls to something like @user roles or @user access, will return back the correct values that may be coded for hide whens, or view access, or even possibly document access via readers and authors fields. We do support document level security, and that includes having multiple readers or authors fields or both that exist as part of a document's design or form design. And then, as long as the user falls, if their name is explicitly listed in there, or they're a member of a group that's listed in with one of those security fields, or they're a member of the specific application role that's listed in one of those fields, and they'll be given the appropriate access based on whether it's a reader's field, whether they're allowed to read the document, or an author's field, whether or not they can edit a document that's been currently brought up into the UI. But as across the board, we do support all those multiple levels from the main application security level, which is defined by just the ACL itself, as well as all that document level security. And that pretty much covers most of the information that would need to be given here within a demonstration of the Composer product. So David, I guess pass it back to you for any other questions possibly.
That's great. Thanks, Brian. Do we have any questions from anyone that wants to learn more about the demonstration or wasn't clear on some of the things that Brian presented?
So David, I've been keeping track of questions, and what I'll do is, again, if anyone has any questions, please list them, and I'll bring them to Brian's attention. Brian, we're going to leave it on your screen in case you want to demonstrate anything specific to the questions. But the first question is there any limitations with the size of an application being converted, such as number of documents or number of fields on a form or number of forms or anything like that?
Obviously, when you have a database that contains, a large amount of data, when you have hundreds of thousands of document records, or even has, maybe hundreds of forms defined within that database, there is no limit as far as what you can convert and what you cannot convert. However, depending on how you have the applications configured with IIS and the actual environment that they're housed within, these applications can be very data intensive, and some fine-tuning may be required at the end of the conversion just to help with the amount of data that views may have to try to go query and load. If a view is going after every single document within a database, then there are some options to go into those specific views and take more of a .NET approach to them than how Notes would kind of treat views in general, where we could refine the selection results for a view down to a specific form table within SQL Server, instead of having to try to browse hundreds of thousands of documents just to locate one single record. So there, as I said, it usually goes to the point of where you're at the end of the application conversion, and you're just doing general performance testing, and some fine-tuning may be required.
Okay, great. Is there a limitation to, where are attachments stored?
So I kind of touched on that one previously. Attachments are stored in a separate attachments table, and here it's actually currently up still. The way these are actually referenced in the original form tables is that all rich text data will be converted to HTML, and that's the kind of visual representation of that rich text data that is actually stored in the form table itself. So for example, let's see, I think we have a RTD, this desk attached here. I think that's actually a field here, just to show an example. Actually, I'm not positive if it's in this table. There it is. So this is just kind of the representation of the rich text data that was converted over from the NSF. And then for any attachments that are actually included within that rich text data, they will be included as actual anchor links, via HTML and the A tag. So you'll see that here we have the beginning of an A tag, and then it sets up its style and the way it's going to appear. And then it sends it off to a handler that we've defined within the Composer runtime that will actually go out and get that attachment record from the attachments table and then initiate a file download on the client's browser.
Okay, great, thank you. And we have another question. What about applications that have more than one SF? So something that is made up of multiple NSFs that may have a navigator in front of it that coordinates all the usage of it.
So it's typical to have Notes applications refer or reference other NSFs. So it may do lookups to an external NSF that just may contain keyword information or just basic, just to like a data NSF that's holding, lookup information that's used across applications or shared by multiple applications. That is supported. Those applications have to be converted as well. And then once they're published, they'll be hosted under kind of a general parent folder within the file system that IIS is using. And then through code calls like @dblookup or @dbcolumn or notesession.getDatabase, getView, all of that stuff, it will then search that general parent folder for those other converted applications based off the original NSF name or replica ID, and locate a view object or a document or whatever it needs to look up to those external databases. Usually when you do have multiple applications within the NSF environment, we have had customers create kind of a general landing page within their website so that it's easy to navigate to all of the other converted applications that users should have access to.
Okay, great. Are multi-value categorized views handled?
Yes. So that option in Notes is the ability to allow multiple values to break across rows within a view. So technically you could have the same actual exact document record being displayed more than once based off of some multiple value, where I should show a category here, where it actually would break across these categories and show multiple or the same record multiple times within the view. We do support that as an option for the columns, where we just say, hey, separate multi-values, and it will work the same way as it did in Notes, where those multiple values will be split apart, and then the actual document rows will be broken across, or actually the document record will be broken across multiple rows.
Okay, great. How does this tool handle workflow applications?
So, workflow is kind of an inherent part of the Notes world, where you typically would have an application where you submit something to an approver, and then an approver approves it, and it moves on to the next stage in that specific document records workflow process. And then eventually, during that process, emails are generated to indicate to the original submitter, or generate emails to the approver, and then on its way down to completion. So since that all mostly generates or comes from the formula language or Lotus script, all of that is converted. So all of that logic that makes up all of the workflow processes within the workflow of an actual document record do exist and are transferred over. As far as emails are concerned, those are configured in the standard ASP.NET way via the web config, and you just have to make sure the applications get connected to an SMTP server so that they can send out emails. As far as third-party workflow projects like Lotus Notes Workflow, we do not support those, and they also contain proprietary information via IBM and Lotus. So we don't support anything that's been generated by those kind of third-party workflow products.
Okay, great, thank you. Where is the ACL security maintained?
So again, that's done here by the mapping file, and this is just mapping in the roles and memberships from a configured security provider into the application, so that these access levels and roles via programmatic code can be referred to properly for a user's memberships, and via their access level, group memberships from the security provider, as well as application role memberships.
Okay, we're almost at the end of them, I think. So if anyone has any more questions, please ask them. How is a person identified to match the canonicalized name in the application?
Okay, so that's a good question. In Notes, the canonical name is your username, in a sense, that existed originally in Notes. That canonical name is usually based off your location within some kind of, which is inside of a directory structure, which is primarily the Domino directory or the Notes address book. So those canonical names do come over as they were originally in the document data. However, when we do support canonical names going forward, just because there is so much security that revolves around those canonical names, as well as programmatic manipulation of those names or access, adding those names into readers or authors fields, etc. So within the runtime, when a user's security context is built, it builds them a new canonical name, and it's based off of their location that exists, for example, within Active Directory. So, based off of my member or user object that exists within Active Directory, it's going to build a new canonical name, kind of primarily based off of the distinguished name that exists for that user account that exists within the Active Directory. Because of this change in name, and most likely that Active Directory won't exactly mirror the Domino directory, then there's going to be different canonical names built by Active Directory than existed originally. We actually do have a separate utility called the Names Resolver, which will then read an XML file that needs to be generated from Domino directory that contains all of the user's canonical names, abbreviated names, and common names, as well as unique value that can be linked between the Domino directory and Active Directory that says, this is a definite one-to-one match on this person who exists in Domino and this user account that exists within Active Directory. Something, that could be used as a unique value could be like an email address or an employee ID. What will happen then is the utility will scan through all of the document data and locate fields similar to what exists here, these specific columns, that are defined as either author, readers, or names fields, and then search for canonical names and find those names that matched from Notes, and then find their counterpart that exists within Active Directory. So then when it goes through, it will resolve those names to the new canonical names, and therefore security can move forward at that point so that users get correct access to documents and hide whens and everything else.
Okay. So
but I said that's a separate utility called the Names Resolver, which you have to, if you're going to use Active Directory as your security provider, you do have to go through that names resolution process. If you use SQL Server as your security provider, you can pretty much just copy over the data directly from Notes address book into SQL Server, and then at that point, the canonical names are exactly the same as were defined in Domino, so then there is no names resolution process that has to be gone through for that.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's great.
We have
Thanks, Rob. Thanks,
two-
Brian.
Yeah, no problem.
We have 1 minute left. I think we've many of those questions. We'll make sure that we respond to the individuals that posted them, and we will send you an answer. But just to be sure that we're still on our 1 hour time frame, I'm just going to walk you through a little bit more information, another slide or two, and then we'll wrap this up. Rob, do you want to make me the presenter?
Yes, I'm doing that now.
Thank you. Great. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So just to address that quadrant that posed the biggest concern for the migration, Rivet's recommendation, of course, here is .NET, and we hope that the presentation that Brian just presented, shares the same views that we have, and that you're able to see that using .NET and using the Composer solution is a fantastic option for these complex applications. So looking at the applications that we've got, dropping them into the various categories. Of course, once we're completed the migration assessment, we recommend, of course, eliminating as many databases as you can to reduce the overall scope. We're in favor or big proponents of archiving applications where you can, instead of migrating them, again, to reduce the total migration scope. The standard Domino databases will move fairly efficiently over to SharePoint, and your complex applications are best suited to .NET. Just a quick slide. Successful migration program, just again based on our experience. One, prepare the business units, make sure they're ready, make sure they're on board, make sure they're helping the migration process. Two, important to complete a thorough migration assessment. You want to understand exactly what you have and where all these applications could potentially fall. Three, you want to eliminate as many of these applications as possible right off the bat to decrease the scope. Four, you consider archiving applications wherever possible, any applications that aren't needed necessarily, aren't providing value to you going forward, but may contain important historical data. We think it's a better fit to archive these as opposed to migrating them. Number five, we only migrate our complex applications to SharePoint. Number six, we focus on .NET for our complex apps. Seven, we avoid redevelopment wherever possible, unless, of course, it's strategic in nature. Number eight, leverage your migration resources or your expert migration resources wherever possible to expedite the process and avoid costly mistakes. And nine, don't ignore the need to continue servicing your organization by focusing solely on the migration. A little bit about Rivet. Of course, our focus is on migrating applications to .NET and SharePoint. DCOM is our application archiving solution. We also have a large and strong mail migration team. We can help you with the mail component of your migration. And finally, next steps. As indicated in the invitation, we are offering a free assessment of your application environment, give you an idea of where we think some of your applications or all your applications could potentially land. And two, we welcome the opportunity to review your complex applications with you as a possible candidate for .NET using the Composer technology solution. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. Brian, Rob, I appreciate your assistance as well. And we'll make these slides available in this presentation, available to everyone that joined us today. And we look forward to future conversations that we may have together. Thank you very much.